Welcome back to the channel and another segment of US Open 2022 favorites. We're going to get into it. And yes, you would have guessed by the thumbnail, it's the big man, Rafael Nadal. We're going to talk about him, the 22 Grand Slam champion, the four-time US Open champion. One of the favorites going into this tournament. We're going to talk about his historic results at the US Open. We're going to talk about his form going into the tournament, on top of also talking about his style of play, how it's going to translate onto the hard courts at Flushing Meadows. And then I'll give you guys my prediction as well. The draw is out as well, so we're not going to talk in huge depth about his draw because, you know, he's got a pretty good draw, to say the least, I have to say. But apart from that, I want to focus on his player profile. Before we get into it, remember to hit the like button and subscribe if you're new. Thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate it. If you're listening on a podcast platform, do remember to hit the like button and subscribe if you are new. Let's get into it. Rafael Nadal. Now, doesn't need too much of an introduction, does he? He's won so many Grand Slams. He's at the top of the tennis game in terms of the Grand Slam race. He is one in front of Novak Djokovic, and he'll be looking to win his 23rd Slam and increase his lead by 2 slams. So, what does this mean for him? What does this mean for the rest of the field? And what does his US Open form look like? So, I said that he'd won it 4 times. So, he won it once in 2019, once in 2017, once in 2013, and the first time in 2010. How does this translate onto or into, I guess, the US Open this year? So, in the last few years, the US Open, has definitely got a little bit quicker because of a relaying of the surface. They've changed the composition of the surface, so it's now slightly quicker than it once was. Being slower was definitely an advantage to Nadal, and it did play almost like Roland Garros in a way in terms of the speed. Of course, the bounce and the how conducive it was to topspin wouldn't have been as comparable, but in terms of the speed, it was similar, and that is a massive plus for someone like a Nadal. In saying that, he did win the Australian Open this year, which is arguably the quickest Grand Slam, because similar to the US Open, Wimbledon have also changed their surface. They've changed the type of grass they use, and I think a couple of outlets and statisticians, even if that's the right word, statisticians have actually said that the Australian Open is now quicker than Wimbledon. I still would say Wimbledon slightly quicker, but it's very, very close. And given that's one of the quickest hard courts on tour, the Australian Open, and Nadal's won it, that puts him in good stead for the US Open this year. Because he's won it this year, he's got history, he's got recent form on a quick hard court. In saying that, though, he hasn't played at the US Open for 3 years. Didn't play 2020, 2021 as well. So it'll be intriguing to see him come back as actually a returning champion, because he hasn't lost since 2019 and hasn't played since 2019. Similarly, Dominic Thiem will do the same. And of course, Medvedev, the winner from last year, will be making his way as well, looking to defend his crown. There'll be 3 male players looking to defend their crowns, technically. Let's then talk about it from a recent form point of view. So he's had a fantastic year, Nadal, of course, winning Australia, winning Roland Garros. If not for the injury, had the potential to win Wimbledon, but obviously the ominous Novak Djokovic was waiting for him in the final. Had to pull out of his semi-final against Nick Kyrgios because of an abdominal issue. And that then kept him out for a little bit of time. So didn't play any tennis until, Cincinnati. Missed Montreal because I think he came out and said, look, I have been playing. I have been, practicing. I feel okay. But when I started to serve, I felt a bit of discomfort. So I don't want to risk it. Understandable, fine. But what's happened is he then played Cincinnati and he lost to Chorich in the first round, who eventually went on to win it. He had ridiculously ridiculously good run. A rejuvenated Chorich, who was one of the original next-gen stars coming through, with Tsitsipas Medvedev, but has had loads of injuries. But a really great performance. And actually, to be fair to Nadal, the only player to take a set off him all week. In saying that, that's less than ideal practice, of course, going into the US Open. And you might then say to me, well, Fazan, the Australian Open, he had a really long layoff, right? We're talking a really long layoff before the Australian Open in 2022, because last year in 2021, after Roland Garros, he didn't play any tennis. So from, whatever it was, it would have been, say, June to December, he played zero tennis. So he was out for like 6 months. Then came to the Australian Open and won it. Yes. But the difference is, before the Australian Open, he played that 1 week of Melbourne Somerset, which was a 1 week tournament where you played on the Australian Open courts with the same balls. Yes, he didn't play against particularly many like top players of note. It was a 250, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But he still got a lot of matches under his belt. He still managed to win the tournament as well. And I think that gave him the necessary warm up and match fit sharpness that he needed to then compete at the top level of a Grand Slam, because he is one of the goats, right? Of course, with Roger and Novak, and those guys, they don't need as much practice and match practice as other players because they've been on the tour for so long. They know how to navigate themselves. They know how to adapt and play on different surfaces. However, the US Open now is interesting because he, yes, has played a lot more tennis this year, but as of recently, he's only played one competitive match since Wimbledon. That's not ideal because it's a hard court. Cincinnati actually plays similarly to the US Open in terms of the balls and also the speed of surface. And the last time he played a hard court match before Cincinnati would have been a while back, right? Indian Wells, potentially, when he lost in the final to Fritz, which was before Roland Garros. So I'm not quite sure how he's going to look in the first couple of rounds. He does have a pretty good draw, I have to say. So the first few rounds, he might and should be able to warm up into the event. So that's a plus. So for Nadal, there's a lot to be positive about if you're a Rafa fan, that's for sure, because I think he should be able to navigate his way through the first week. And then as he gets into the second week is when he should be fully warmed up and then should be able to kind of really ramp it up. And I feel like he should go deep, but we'll talk about that in a second. And no spoiler alerts for my ATP draw preview and prediction video, which is out. So do check it out if you're interested as well, where I break down the draw in detail. So an interesting stat as well for those statisticians. His record on hard court is actually the worst of any other surface, apart from carpet, which we won't talk about because, I mean, he's only played 8 matches on there. So grass, he's got a 79.2% win ratio on. Clay, 91.3%. Hard, 78.3%. Now, in saying that, he's like, between hard and grass, there's a difference of 1.1%, and he's played substantially less matches on grass. So it's probably not as comparable as it's not. Yeah, it's not really as comparable as you would think, I guess, in that sense. So that's definitely something that he needs to. I mean, he won't even bother looking at that. He'll just ignore it because it's still a ridiculously high win percentage. And yes, you might say, well, I would arguably say that grass is probably his worst surface because of how low bouncing it is. Doesn't really suit his game. He likes higher bouncing balls, higher bouncing courts, and the US Open will give him some of that. It will be slightly, as I said, it will be slightly. Look, I mean, it will definitely be slightly slower than Australia, but it's going to be a lot quicker than he's used to. That's for sure. So he's going to have to look into that and understand and adapt, I think, quicker than he'd probably want to, for sure. But Yeah, I think Rafa is definitely, for me, one of the favorites. I mean, Medvedev is up there, but he hasn't been in great form recently, so it's almost like, oh, you know what, this could be there for a taking, or we might get a random winner like we've got at the US Open many a time. So how does his style, for those of you who have been living under a rock and don't watch any tennis, maybe you're new to tennis, uh, what's Nadal's style? And how does that translate onto the US Open courts? And then we'll finish up with a prediction. So for anyone that hasn't seen Nadal play, his game is based upon a few things. One is determination, grittiness, and hard competitive nature. A lot of people used to say, look, I used to see Nadal jumping up and down and look at him across the net, and I lost the match mentally because he was just so dialed in at all times, so competitive. People were intimidated. Now, of course, people have played him a lot more and more, so that doesn't have as much of an effect, but it still has an effect. We can look back to the French Open this year with Casper Ruud. He was just happy to be playing against Nadal in a way, is what it came across as, and was almost in awe of him. Being a lefty is a massive advantage, of course, that Nadal has a huge weapons on his forehand, and his backhand has been shored up a lot. But on the forehand side, we'll touch upon that first and concentrate on it. Yes, he can hit the buggy whip, as Gil Gross would like to call it, or I like to call it the Lasso Forehand, which is a very unique forehand. Whips it with quite a lot of coverage over the net, high topspin, and the ball ends up kicking up to the righty's backhand. So that gives him a massive advantage. On a hard court, though, unlike a clay court, it doesn't stick in the surface as much and isn't as conducive to topspin. So the ball's not going to pop as much as it would on the clay. So he will look to flatten it out a bit more at times. And like we saw at Wimbledon, he did that, and he has the ability to do that. He has lots of different looks, lots of different variations on the forehand side. He can hit the forehand flatter. And ironically, in practice, if you watch him practice, he barely ever hits the whipped forehand. He actually hits almost regulation forehands, you might say. And that's because his uncle, actually, Tony Nadal, who no longer coaches him, he now coaches Felix, but obviously still his uncle, doesn't like him, apparently. He doesn't like the buggy whip forehand and tried to get him, I guess, to stop doing it. But when you then get into a match and you're competitively playing and the speed is quick, you go into comfortable habits. But this is clearly a habit that is iconic and also one that has, definitely propelled his game and given him a little bit of an edge for sure. But just a little interesting fact, and to show that, look, he has for sure, for me anyway, the arguably potentially one of the best forehands ever. And because of how different it is, how like the problems that I guess are faced by opponents because of it, it's so difficult because not especially when he first came onto tour, no one was hitting the ball with that much topspin. Now you have people that are getting close, like Berrettini's forehand apparently is very close in terms of revolutions per minute or RPM. So that's a massive advantage. And of course, his forehand as a lefty, it gets across the righty backhand. He absolutely will attack. Anyone who's got a weaker backhand, they will be pummeled into the backhand corner like we saw against Casper Ruud in the French Open final. And what happens is he'll then get a shorter ball. He'll then run around it, hit an into-out forehand winner, and he'll unleash. And that is arguably his best shot. The into-out forehand is so potent. Then we can talk about, I guess, his backhand. So his backhand is much improved. It was still pretty good when he came onto tour, but he's actually naturally a righty, Nadal, as well. And his uncle wanted him to become a left-hander because he thought it would give him an advantage, and it has given him an advantage, to be fair. His backhand is much improved in Australia at the Australian Open against Medvedev. It arguably was his most crucial shot, and especially the backhand up the line. And he won the Australian Open with a backhand up the line. And he I think he'd hit like 3 backhand winners in a row in that game to end up winning and taking the title. And it's such a crucial shot, I feel. on any surface that isn't clay, because on clay, I feel like he's got more time. It's a lot slower, so he's able to hit a lot of forehands. And he is one of the best players of running around a forehand. His movement around the backhand is incredible. And he's able to defend so incredibly, get across to the forehand corner. He has that kind of squash court forehand that he's able to defend with, and it's so effective. It's a low slice over the net, and he's able to recover incredibly well, and still is very, very fit. But the backhand is, I mean, he can flatten it, he can go more loopy with it, but very deep into the court. But when he flattens it out, it is huge and arguably more powerful than even his forehand, and arguably more reliable nowadays as well. It really is a reliable tool that he's able to pull from. Also, really good backhand slice. Likes to slice with opponents that he knows aren't comfortable with the net. He'll slice low over the net and shorter, actually, and drag them into the net and then pass them or lob them. And it's an effective tactic he used against Medvedev in the Australian Open final. So he might use that on the hard courts here at the US Open. As I said, it's not going to play as quickly as Australia, but it's getting closer to that type of speed and away from the Roland Garros speed. Then we can look at, I guess, his returning. So in Australia, he tinkered with return positions, and I think he will look to stand up on the court at times at the baseline. He'll also still stand back. I think he'll vary that up, and that's something that is very interesting to see. He actually has the highest return games won percentage of all time. I would say that Djokovic probably, to the eye, is the better returner. But Nadal is top 2 for sure of all time, in my opinion. And interesting to see if we could see stats for his returning on a specific surface, because I wonder whether he would be top on a hard court. I'm not too sure about that one. If we then talk about, I guess if we then talk about, his serve, that's going to be crucial for him, because genuinely, his serve, when it's not firing, he can then struggle with it. Although we saw against Taylor Fritz, he really was serving, 20 miles per hour slower than usual because of the abdominal, and still managed to win because his forehand was so potent, and it is incredible. But I think to win the whole tournament, he'll need to serve well, because everyone else on the surface is a lot more comfortable on the hard courts than they are on clay or grass. So this is where he's going to really come up against people who are comfortable, hungry, and they would have played a lot more matches than him recently as well in Cincinnati and Canada. So they'll be a lot more, in tune with how the surface is going to play, how the balls are going to play, etc. So for me, it's a big, big, big plus that he's got the experience he has. He's played at the US Open so many years, won it 4 times. He should be able to take that experience and go forward and make a run, make a deep run, because look, it's a chance to win 3 out of the 4 slams and have an incredible, potentially unprecedented year, considering a lot of people thought he might retire after the French Open last year. My prediction, and a little bit of a spoiler alert, so if you don't want to be spoiled and you want to go and check out the ATP draw preview and prediction video, go and check that out now. My prediction, and I think he should at least make the final, given what I've seen in the draw. And I predict that he's going to win it. Now, it's a bold prediction. Some people will say it's not because, of course, he's one of the GOATs, but I just have a feeling that Medvedev's not playing as well as he has been in the past. And then it's very open. But when it's this open, normally a Djokovic or a Nadal, they take it by the scruff of the neck and they say, yeah, okay, well, this is mine. This is mine. No one's going to dominate. I'll dominate. So we'll see what happens. Let me know your thoughts on Nadal. Are you excited to see him play? Are you worried that he hasn't had much match practice? How do you think his game's going to translate onto a slightly quicker surface at the US Open? And in 2019, I think that was before the resurfacing. So it's going to play more like the Australian Open. He won it this year, but it's still, not super comfortable to him. Is he going to have to replicate that Australian Open form to win the tournament? And can he do it? Let me know your thoughts. Thanks very much, guys. Stay safe and well. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe if you're new, and also do remember to leave a rating or review if you're listening on a podcast platform.